it just kind of happened. Things like I told somebody else once, it kind of went sideways. I believe I deserve to die. And I'm ready for that. It's not right to take a life. You know, everybody harps at me, you know, I'm a monster, I'm a monster, I'm a monster. They don't know who I am.
This man from Mississippi, who maintained his innocence until the very end, was involved in one of the most notorious crimes in recent United States history. In this video, you will learn how, together with an associate he trusted, he participated in criminal activities that shocked the nation. The case has sparked widespread speculation. Born on June 9, 1988 in Hamilton, Missouri, Sid Rainwater was the daughter of Tracy Dennis Rainwater. Although it is believed that she was the only child and there are no records of her biological father's identity, it appears that Tracy's family played a role in raising her during her early years. She attended primary school in Harrisonville and later, in 2005, completed high school at the same institution. At the age of 17, Sid had her first child, a child who was not raised by either her or the biological father, whose identity remains unconfirmed and was later cared for by other family members. During that time, Tracy, Sid's mother, was in a relationship with Leonard Couch. Although details are limited, it is believed that the relationship was abusive, with family members urging her to reconsider the situation. On Friday, April 13, 2007, Tracy went for a walk in the woods, a pastime she enjoyed, but when night fell, she did not return. As days passed without any word, her relatives reported her as missing. She was 43 years old, and her daughter was nearly 19. Amid the distress of not knowing her whereabouts, relatives suspected Leonard, although the investigation did not uncover further evidence in that regard. In early May of the following year, an unexpected event occurred. A farmer from central Missouri, while spreading fertilizer in a field near Lebanon, adjacent to an area known as the Valley of the Moon, discovered what appeared to be human bones and remnants of clothing, including a woman's shoe. The discovery site was close to Leonard's home and about 300 kilometers from the Rainwater residence. The farmer promptly notified the authorities, and officials arrived shortly after. In addition to the remains, several human teeth were recovered to assist with the identification process. Subsequent analysis of the teeth led to the identification of Tracy, as confirmed by an anthropologist from the University of Missouri. The then Sheriff of Clement County, Richard Rinkle, later explained that the condition of the remains made it difficult to determine the exact cause of death. Following this, the police began interviewing those close to the victim. Leonard mentioned that Tracy often ventured into the woods to relax or forage, a somewhat unusual pastime. However, local testimonies provided limited assistance to the investigation, and the case gradually receded from the spotlight, with no arrests made by Saturday, May 17, 2008. Friends, relatives and neighbours gathered in the Colonial Chapel of Shadle to bid their final farewell during Tracy's funeral service. Meanwhile, the county coroner, Steve Murrell, kept the case file open over the years. Sid had to cope not only with the grief and uncertainty surrounding his mother's disappearance, but also with various challenges that eventually led him down an uncertain and unfortunate path, experiencing unstable employment and even homelessness in his early 30s. Despite these hardships, those close to him observed that his determination to overcome adversity remained intact. Between 2020 and 2021, Sid met a man named James David Phelps, who was nearly twice his age. James lived on a property deep in a secluded forest, isolated from much of society, but he was not alone. He shared his home with Timothy Norton. Although very little is known about the early lives of James and Timothy, it appears that their friendship began back in their school days at Skyline High, even though they were in different grades. Their connection, rooted in shared interests in darker themes, grew stronger after graduation. James enlisted in the Navy, and his life thereafter took on a more secretive tone, while Timothy also joined the Navy. In the early 1990s, James relocated to a secluded property on the outskirts of Lebanon, Missouri. Around that time, Timothy encountered minor legal issues related to financial matters and job instability, which contributed to 2 unsuccessful marriages. Later, he worked as a long-distance truck driver before eventually settling at James's isolated residence, a location that raised concerns among local residents. Additionally, James maintained an online profile in an alternative dating community that centered on role-playing scenarios involving power and control. The details of how Sid met James remain unclear, but it seems that in her vulnerable state, she placed a great deal of trust in him. Thus, on Saturday, July 24, 2021, while nearly asleep on the living room floor, James contacted Timothy via text message, inviting him back to the property. During this exchange, they arranged a crime that would soon become one of the most disturbing cases in Missouri and across the United States. After overpowering the 33-year-old victim, she was subjected to severe mistreatment, which included confinement in a large holding enclosure. In a display of their deeply disturbing behavior, the duo documented the abuse with photographs and videos. In the isolation of her captivity, her cries for help went unheard. Shortly thereafter, James and Timothy ended the victim's life and, in a particularly methodical and chilling manner, dismembered her body. They packaged the remains, some packages bearing marked dates, and stored them in the property's refrigerator. Later, images and videos capturing her distress were uploaded to a restricted section of the Internet, accessible only through special authorization or software, where users remain anonymous and communications are encrypted. In the days following the crime, James and Timothy carried on with their daily routines. However, after a week without any sign of Sid, her family reported her missing on Wednesday, August 25, 2021. Soon after, Chief Officer Cora Terry compiled a profile based on the last known sightings of Sid, which led investigators to track down James's remote property near Lebanon. That same day, Officer Chris Clark conducted a welfare check at the residence, only to find no trace of Sid or its occupants. On September 1, 2021, Sergeant Robert Simons returned to the property and encountered James. According to court records, during the ensuing interview, James acknowledged that Sid had been at his home shortly before her disappearance. He mentioned that she had spoken of travelling to Colorado and had been seen near a vehicle at the end of the driveway during the night, though he had not heard from her since. The detective also observed that part of the property appeared to have been dismantled, yet no personal belongings of Sid were found. As days passed without additional evidence, local law enforcement grew increasingly frustrated, as if the victim had vanished without a trace, until renewed investigative efforts finally offered a glimmer of hope for resolution. On Thursday, September 16, 2021, a critical break in the case emerged when an online informant provided the FBI with several unsettling photographs reportedly discovered on the deep Internet. These images appeared to document the crime against a young woman, showing details of the aftermath. In one set, the victim was depicted in a vulnerable state, confined within a cage. In another, she was shown restrained near a gantry crane, an industrial apparatus typically used in wildlife processing. The material was promptly forwarded to the Dallas County Sheriff's Office in Missouri, and agents later identified the victim as CID. Detailed review of the audiovisual evidence suggested that the background in the images was likely James's residence. That same day, authorities secured search orders for the property and obtained authorization to examine electronic devices. Shortly afterward, teams from the Dallas County Sheriff's Office, the FBI, and the Greene County Crime Scene Unit conducted a search at the location. James, identified as the primary suspect, was arrested and transferred to the county detention center. A review of his cell phone revealed several photographs showing CID in a compromised state and confined within a cage. On Friday, September 17, 2021, Sergeant John Levy of the Dallas County Sheriff's Office and FBI officer Alan Atwood attempted to interview James. However, after invoking his right to legal counsel, he declined to answer questions. Concurrently, investigators made a highly disturbing discovery in the property's freezer: packages containing items suspected to be human tissue. Some of these packages bore markings, including a number that corresponded with the date of his disappearance. Nearby, behind the residence, authorities located the gantry crane and a custom-built cage constructed with welded pipes, chains and cables, a design more typically used for housing large exotic animals. A few metres from the property's limits, bone fragments were discovered on September 20, 2021. During this period, Officer Allen, along with a colleague from the PBI, interviewed Timothy in Dallas County. Initially, Timothy attempted to distance himself from the case by claiming he was merely a truck driver who did not reside at the property, but instead lived in his truck when not working. However, after investigators confirmed inconsistencies in his account, Timothy admitted that he was aware YThe had been confined in a cage at James's residence during the week following her disappearance. Investigators then focused on processing the physical evidence from the scene, sending the remains to forensic pathologists for further analysis. Digital evidence collected from the suspect's devices was also reviewed by computer forensic experts, and soon after, the morgue team confirmed the victim's identity as CID. The text messages exchanged between James and Timothy prior to the crime were recovered, providing additional context. In a subsequent interrogation, Timothy accepted responsibility for his role in the crime. According to his account, he restrained the victim while James fatally suffocated her using a plastic bag. Timothy further stated that James secured the victim to a gantry crane and then dismembered her remains, while he assisted in transporting the evidence to the basement. In an unexpected development on October 4, 2021, a fire significantly damaged part of James's house, while both he and Timothy remained in custody. Investigators later determined that the fire was deliberately set using an incendiary device placed within a mortar tube and activated by a tripwire. The incident, like the rest of the case, fueled widespread public speculation and renewed interest, as the limited information previously released by authorities continued to captivate and disturb the community. On Thursday, September 16, 2021, a major development occurred when an online informant supplied the FBI with several unsettling photographs allegedly found on a restricted area of the Internet. The images appeared to document the crime against a young woman, showing scenes where she was confined and restrained in a manner that raised serious concerns. The material was immediately passed on to the Dallas County Sheriff's Office in Missouri, and investigators later identified the victim as CID. Detailed review of the audio-visual evidence also suggested that the background might correspond with James's residence. On the same day, authorities secured multiple search warrants for the property and for electronic devices linked to the case. Soon after the warrants were issued, teams from the Dallas County Sheriff's Office, the FBI, and the Greene County Crime Scene Unit conducted a thorough search at the residence. James, who was identified as the primary suspect, was arrested and transferred to the county detention center. A review of his cell phone revealed several photographs depicting CID in a compromised and confined situation. The following day, on Friday, September 17, 2021, Sergeant John Levy of the Dallas County Sheriff's Office and FBI officer Alan Atwood attempted to question James. However, after invoking his right to legal counsel, he declined to answer further questions. Simultaneously, a search of the property uncovered items in a freezer that were believed to be related to the crime. Some of these packages bore markings that coincided with the date of CID's disappearance. Additionally, behind the residence, authorities found industrial equipment and a custom-built cage, described in expert reports as having been specifically modified for holding large animals. On September 20, 2021, further evidence emerged when bone fragments were discovered near the property's boundaries. During this period, Officer Allen, accompanied by a colleague from the PBI, interviewed Timothy in Dallas County. Initially, Timothy attempted to distance himself from the case by stating that he was only a truck driver residing in his vehicle when not on duty. However, after inconsistencies in his account were confirmed, He admitted during a follow-up interview that he was aware of CID being confined in a cage at James's residence in the days following her disappearance. Investigators then focused on processing the physical evidence from the scene. The suspected human remains were sent to forensic pathologists, while digital evidence from the suspect's devices was analysed by computer forensic experts. Shortly thereafter, the morgue team confirmed the victim's identity as CID. Recovered text messages between James and Timothy provided additional context, and in a subsequent interrogation, Timothy accepted responsibility for his role. According to his account, he restrained the victim while James was responsible for her death and the subsequent handling of her remains, which included moving them to a secure area of the property. In an unexpected turn on October 4, 2021, a fire caused extensive damage to a significant portion of James's residence while both suspects remained in custody. Investigators later determined that the fire was deliberately set using an incendiary device combined with a tripwire mechanism. This act of arson only intensified public speculation about a case that had already captivated and disturbed many. The investigation also sparked numerous rumours online. Early reports of the disturbing images led some to wonder if CID was merely the visible victim in a larger network of illicit online activity. There were suggestions that the informant, who was reportedly tracked to Germany, a location that may have been obscured by technical means, had uncovered evidence of an underground market involving the trafficking of human remains. Speculation about James's online presence further fueled rumours that he might have been in contact with additional potential victims. At the same time, comparisons were drawn between the tragic fate of CID and the circumstances surrounding her mother's disappearance, prompting some to search for a connection between the two incidents. However, authorities later clarified that, as of that time, no link had been established between the two cases. It was also noted that Leonard, Tracy's former partner, had died around that period. To counteract the numerous unfounded rumours, the Dallas County Sheriff's Office released an official statement on social media. Scott Rise, the department spokesperson at the time, emphasized that real-life criminal investigations are complex and time-consuming processes, not the rapid, simplistic procedures often portrayed on television. He explained that gathering and analyzing evidence required considerable time and rigor in laboratory settings, making immediate results unlikely given the intricate nature of the case. During his first court appearance, Timothy declared his innocence. Yet, shortly afterward, during an interview with a local media outlet, he provided a detailed account of how he and James had previously sought out potential victims. These public statements, made in the vicinity of local businesses, only added further complexity to the case. In addition to attempting to avoid accountability, both suspects faced serious charges, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, and improper handling of a corpse. In early 2022, James secured a new public defender experienced in handling capital cases, and he subsequently filed a motion to dismiss the charge related to the handling of a corpse. Following that, delaying tactics ensued. In July 2022, James pleaded not guilty, and in September 2022, prosecutors made an initial attempt to seek the death penalty, a strategy that appeared designed to extend proceedings. His defence then requested a change of venue, and his next court appearance was scheduled for January 20th, 2023. Meanwhile, with mounting evidence and the inevitability of legal consequences, Timothy ultimately chose to plead guilty to the most serious charge. His plea agreement allowed him to avoid additional charges, resulting in his sentence of life in prison without parole for the crime against Cassidy Rainwater. After the hearing, Dallas County District Attorney Jonathan Barker addressed the media in May 2023. Although James continued to maintain his innocence, he ultimately entered an Alford plea, a legal option that allowed him to acknowledge that sufficient evidence existed to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt without formally admitting responsibility. This maneuver enabled him to avoid the prospect of a death sentence. At the sentencing hearing, which was closed to cameras, those present heard Judge Jill Porter deliver her final verdict. To date, no arrests have been made in connection with the arson, and no evidence has been found linking the incidents involving Tracy to CID's case. Despite ongoing speculation in various online forums regarding potential connections to other criminal activities, such theories remain unsubstantiated. Notably, independent investigator Kathy B. later reported that, following extensive inquiries, a relative confirmed that the victim's surviving descendant is safe and well.
Megan Sharpton went to an interview and disappeared without a trace. The next morning, her body was discovered in a field, prompting the police to begin their search for the culprit. The case involved many confusing moments and unexpected twists, but in the end, the truth was uncovered. In this video, we will tell you what happened to Megan Sharpton. Megan Sharpton was born on October 24, 1987, in the small American town of Tullahoma, Tennessee. She grew up in a large, close-knit family with 2 sisters and a brother with whom she got along well. Her parents made sure to give their children plenty of attention, but Megan was especially close to her mother. From a young age, Megan helped care for her younger siblings and was always willing to lend a hand to friends and family. As a child, Megan decided she wanted to become a nurse, so she enrolled in a local college 10 kilometers from her home. She also worked as a waitress in local restaurants to help support herself. After some time, she moved in with her boyfriend Chris. By the summer of 2012, when Megan was 24, she was just months away from graduating from college, after which she planned to begin her nursing career. In the months leading up to graduation, Megan took a job at a nursing home to gain practical experience in caring for the elderly. Despite her busy schedule, Megan made a point to visit her family whenever possible. On June 1st, her sister, who lived in another city, came to town, and Megan promised to meet with her. However, that evening, Megan called her mother and said she would be late because she had an interview for a new job. She was excited about the opportunity and promised her mother she would come as soon as it was over. The job involved caring for an elderly woman. As time passed, Megan didn't respond to calls or messages. Her parents became concerned and reached out to her boyfriend Chris, but he had no idea where she was and was unaware of her interview. However, her parents chose not to panic immediately, reasoning that at 24, Megan had a busy life and could have been preoccupied. But the next day, Megan still hadn't shown up. Meanwhile, about 1:30 a.m., a group of teenagers in a remote area a few kilometers from the city noticed a fire. They initially assumed it was a forest fire, but when they called the firefighters, an unexpected discovery awaited them. As the fire was being put out, the firefighters found a body in the center of the flames. When the police arrived, they quickly realized it was a case of murder. However, they were unable to identify the deceased woman at first because she had no identification, wallet, or phone. Due to the damage from the fire, her identity was impossible to determine. The only clue was a pair of small star-shaped tattoos. The detectives investigated the crime scene and concluded that the victim had died before the fire started, as evidenced by a severe head injury that appeared to be fatal. Yet there were no traces of the killer's presence, and some of the victim's clothing was missing. Based on the victim's t-shirt, which indicated she worked as a nurse, the police suspected that she might be a local resident, but no missing person reports matched the description. The case gained attention when a post appeared on social media about a woman with star-shaped tattoos found in the field. Megan's mother saw the post and recognized the tattoos, leading to the grim realization that the deceased was her daughter. A medical examiner confirmed the identity, and it was established that Megan had died from a bullet wound to the back of the head. This confirmed the police's theory that she was killed elsewhere before being transported to the field and set on fire. Forensic experts found evidence of violence before Megan's death and managed to extract a DNA sample from the perpetrator. They ran the sample through a database, but there were no matches. Investigators then turned their attention to Megan's car, a red Mustang, which she had driven to work that evening. When the car was found to be missing, it suggested the killer had likely taken it, and they hoped it might yield important evidence. The search for the car and the perpetrator continued, and the police began to consider potential suspects among Megan's acquaintances. The first person of interest was her boyfriend Chris, and the detectives had valid reasons to scrutinize him. Megan's sister quickly informed the police that there had been tension in Megan's relationship with Chris, leading her to suspect his involvement in the murder. Megan had been in a relationship with Chris for a significant period of 3 years, and during a part of this time they lived together. They rented an apartment where they shared the space with another neighbor who also contributed to the rent. This neighbor, who was later questioned by the police, adamantly denied any involvement in the mysterious circumstances surrounding Megan's disappearance. Initially, Chris told the authorities that everything between him and Megan was fine. Their relationship, from his perspective, seemed normal and without any major issues. However, as the investigation moved forward, Chris admitted that their relationship had been strained in recent times. He confessed that things between them were deteriorating, and it appeared that they were heading toward a breakup. Despite these personal issues, Chris maintained that he had no possible motive to harm Megan in any way. In an attempt to clarify his whereabouts during the time of Megan's death, Chris insisted that he had an airtight alibi. He maintained that he was somewhere else at the time, far from the location where the crime likely occurred. As the police began to check and verify his alibi, they also began examining the apartment where Megan and Chris had lived. This apartment, which had once been their shared home, revealed some unsettling evidence. When investigators searched the apartment, the bathroom provided an alarming clue. There, they discovered traces of blood that immediately piqued their interest. They also found needles that contained illegal substances. These findings were extremely troubling because they hinted at a darker side to the couple's life, one that involved drugs. This revelation raised further questions about the nature of their relationship and the possibility that drugs played a role in Megan's disappearance and tragic death. The police were now beginning to question whether substance abuse had contributed to the escalation of events leading up to that fateful night. While investigating the apartment, the police were also able to track down Megan's red Mustang, which was discovered about 20 kilometers from the city. It had been abandoned in a desolate, isolated area with no signs of a struggle inside. The car was empty, missing both Megan's personal items, including her wallet and phone. The absence of her belongings suggested that the criminal had either taken them or discarded them in another location. The police quickly appealed to the public for help, urging anyone who might find these missing items or who had any relevant information to come forward. Although there were no indications of a struggle or signs of blood in the car, there was one piece of evidence that caught the attention of the detectives. In the car, they found a note with an address written on it, an address that, after investigation, turned out to be non-existent. This led the investigators to a chilling conclusion. The person who had called Megan to offer her the job may have been trying to lure her to a remote location in order to carry out the crime. The use of a fictitious address seemed like a deliberate attempt to mislead Megan into a dangerous situation. The detectives now had a solid lead, but they needed to uncover more about this mysterious person who had contacted her. At the outset of the investigation, the police learned that Megan had been scheduled for an interview on the night of her disappearance. However, they were unable to track down the individual who had offered her the job. The non-existent address given to Megan seemed to be a deliberate attempt by the perpetrator to deceive her and take her to a secluded spot where the crime could unfold. The detectives believed that the criminal had intentionally manipulated Megan, possibly with the promise of a job opportunity, in order to carry out the murder. As the investigation continued, the case took on an even more eerie and unsettling nature. The public began to draw disturbing parallels to another missing persons case that had occurred several months earlier, hundreds of kilometers away from Tullahoma. The woman who had disappeared in this earlier case was approximately the same age as Megan, and like her, had been studying to become a nurse. This coincidence prompted some to speculate that the same person might be responsible for both disappearances. The similarities between the two cases were too striking to ignore, and many began to fear that a serial killer might be operating in the region. This fear only intensified as more details of Megan's case emerged, leading to widespread anxiety among residents in the area. The possibility that the criminal might strike again made everyone feel uneasy. As the police continued their investigations, they began to interrogate Megan and Chris's neighbor. This neighbor, who had been implicated because of the blood found in the apartment, admitted to using illegal substances. He claimed, however, that Megan and Chris were unaware of his drug addiction and that they had never been involved in drug use themselves. The forensic analysis confirmed that the blood found at the apartment did indeed belong to the neighbor, but his involvement in the murder was not immediately clear. He also made a startling claim. He said that Megan and Chris's relationship had actually ended long ago, and that recently he had started dating Megan. He further claimed that he had concealed his drug addiction from her, hoping to keep it hidden. This revelation caused the police to seriously consider both Chris and the neighbor as potential suspects. Chris had a possible motive for violence due to the tension in his relationship with Megan, while the neighbor's addiction to illegal substances made him a possible suspect as well. The police, however, lacked solid evidence to definitively connect either of them to the crime. Their suspicions remained, but without further proof, the investigation was at a standstill. During another round of questioning, Chris provided a key piece of information that would become important to the investigation. He explained that on the day Megan disappeared, a man had called Megan's old phone, which had been left behind at their apartment. The caller mentioned that he wanted to speak with Megan about a job opportunity as a nurse and claimed that Megan had been recommended by a certain Naomi. Chris mentioned that Megan had often spoken of Naomi, a fellow student from college, but he didn't know much about her beyond that. Determined to follow this lead, the police started looking for Naomi among the students of Modlov College. After some effort, they managed to track down Naomi's address. When they visited her home, however, they discovered that she wasn't there. The police spoke to her neighbors, one of whom provided them with Naomi's phone number. When the police called Naomi, she was surprised to hear from them. She claimed that she barely knew Megan, that they had crossed paths in a few classes, but they didn't communicate much beyond that. Naomi also stated that she had never recommended Megan for a job, and in fact, she found Megan's behavior somewhat annoying. This revelation disappointed the investigators, as it meant that this lead had turned out to be another dead end. However, Chris had also provided the police with the phone number from which Megan had received the call. The detectives traced the number to a prepaid phone, which could not be linked to a specific name. Despite the anonymity of the phone, the police managed to trace it back to the store where it had been purchased. Reviewing the surveillance footage from the store, they were able to identify the person who had bought the phone. This individual, captured clearly on the footage, would become the police's primary suspect. The evidence had begun to fall into place, and the investigation gained new momentum. With the identification of the phone buyer, the police now had a clear lead to follow. This would prove to be a turning point in the case. The mystery of who was responsible for Megan's death and why was beginning to unravel, and the police were more determined than ever to bring the perpetrator to justice. At several key points along the route, both phones, Donnie's and Megan's, were found to be in close proximity to each other, especially near the location where Megan's body was discovered. These locations were significant to the investigation, as they helped to trace the path the killer took and ultimately pointed towards Donnie. The investigation revealed that Donnie's family owned several farms, one of which was implicated in the crime. According to the investigation, after kidnapping Megan, Donnie brought her to one of these farms where he subjected her to horrific violence, including rape, before ultimately murdering her. The detectives quickly obtained a search warrant for the farm in question, and the results were damning. Among the items found at the scene was a partially burned scarf, which, as it turned out, belonged to Megan. This scarf had been a gift from her sister, and its discovery in such a compromising state was an important piece of evidence linking Donnie to the crime. This, combined with the DNA match between Donnie and the samples found on Megan's body, was enough to move the case forward to trial. On November 5th, Donnie was officially charged with murder. As the trial began, new and disturbing details about Donnie's activities were revealed, strengthening the case against him even further. Experts who analyzed Donnie's phone uncovered a troubling pattern. Donnie had repeatedly contacted other women, offering them jobs caring for elderly people. However, none of these attempts had been successful. According to the investigation, Donnie found Megan's name in his wife's contact list and reached out to her, claiming that Naomi had recommended her for the job. Megan agreed to meet him, unaware that the address he gave her was fake. Donnie lured Megan to a deserted area where he attacked her and then transported her to one of his family's farms. There, he subjected her to further violence before killing her. Afterward, he moved her body to a remote field and set it on fire, likely in an attempt to destroy evidence. Another striking piece of evidence was the replacement of the seat covers and floor mats in the pickup truck Donnie used to transport Megan's body. It seemed that Donnie feared that traces of blood might remain, and he took extreme measures to cover his tracks. Despite Donnie's efforts to erase all evidence of his crime, the police were able to build a strong case against him. As for Naomi, the police eventually concluded that she had no involvement in Megan's murder and had no knowledge of what had transpired. Naomi had been working the night of the murder, a fact that was corroborated by multiple pieces of evidence. At the trial, Donnie continued to maintain his innocence. His defense team prepared for what could have been a long and drawn-out court battle. However, when Donnie realized that the prosecution was seeking the death penalty, he chose to strike a deal with the authorities. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, Donnie agreed to confess to the murder. As part of the plea deal, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. But Donnie's story didn't end there. After some time, he began to claim that he had only confessed under pressure. He demanded a review of his case, and when the judge granted his request, Donnie quickly reverted to his previous confession. During the review, the death penalty was reinstated as a potential punishment, which likely prompted Donnie to stick with his original confession. The court also shed light on why Donnie had voluntarily provided his DNA sample to the detectives. Initially, it had appeared that he was trying to destroy all evidence by setting fire to Megan's body. However, it turned out that Donnie had been hoping that the fire would destroy any physical traces, leaving the authorities with no evidence to compare his DNA to. Unfortunately for him, the investigators were one step ahead, and the DNA comparison led directly to his conviction. Despite all of this, investigators ultimately determined that Donnie was not connected to another case involving the disappearance of a student who had gone missing 6 months before Megan. In that case, other suspects emerged, and Donnie was no longer considered a person of interest. After the verdict was announced, Megan's sister made an emotional statement, expressing her belief that Donnie would have continued to target young girls had he not been stopped by Megan's tragic death. She was adamant that Megan had prevented many more innocent lives from being taken by exposing Donnie's dangerous and predatory nature. What made this case even more heartbreaking was the devastating impact it had on Megan's family. In November 2013, Megan's mother, who had worked tirelessly to help the police bring her daughter's killer to justice, tragically took her own life. The emotional toll of the loss, coupled with the traumatic nature of the crime, became too much for her to bear. It was a sorrowful end to a mother's fight for justice, and her death highlighted the lasting psychological effects that such a horrific crime can have on the families of the victims. Looking at Donnie's criminal history, it becomes apparent that he should have been stopped much earlier. Among his many convictions were accusations of kidnapping a young woman, but at that time, he managed to evade justice, and the criminal remained free. This raises the disturbing possibility that Megan may not have been Donnie's first victim. The police were never able to conclusively determine if he had committed other crimes before, but his pattern of behavior strongly suggests that there may be more victims who have yet to come forward. This case serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk in the lives of young women and the lengths to which some individuals will go to conceal their predatory behavior. Donnie Frank's story is one of many that underscores the need for constant vigilance and a commitment to justice for the victims who never get to speak for themselves. It's a tragic and heartbreaking tale of how one person's evil can affect countless others, and how, in the end, justice may come too late for some. As we reflect on this case, it's important to remember the impact it had on Megan's family, especially her mother, who could not survive the weight of her grief. Though the killer was caught, the damage had already been done, and the pain would last forever. Megan's story, while ultimately leading to justice, is one of many that continues to remind us of the fragile nature of life and the importance of protecting those who are vulnerable. A small city in Yellowstone County, Montana, is widely known for its picturesque countryside, filled with hiking trails, camping spots, and serene lakes. The city center is lively, often bustling with parades, festivals, and vibrant streets lined with unique shops and excellent restaurants. The town has a close-knit community, with a population of about 7,000 people. Among the residents was 57-year-old Lori Bray, who worked at a local casino and led a seemingly peaceful life. Lori preferred solitude, living alone with her beloved dogs, Mac and Nikki. Despite her solitary lifestyle, Lori was deeply connected with her family, particularly her son Justin, with whom she communicated daily. She was a loving grandmother to 5 grandchildren and maintained close relationships with her many siblings, nieces, and nephews. Lori's love for animals was well known. She frequently donated to rescue centers and organizations that helped dogs find new, loving homes. Her former foster care roommate, Katie, described Lori as one of the kindest and most gentle people she had ever met, with a soft voice, a warm personality, and a friendly smile. Lori was always willing to help others and was someone people could rely on. Her son Justin mentioned that her trusting nature could be a double-edged sword, as she tended to see the good in everyone, sometimes to her detriment. On September 30th, 2019, Lori had a typical day. She worked the evening shift at Cedar Ridge Casino and finished just before midnight. She locked up the casino and left, heading home. However, the following day, October 1st, something went terribly wrong. Lori, who was known for her punctuality, was late for her shift, which was highly unusual. She hadn't informed anyone of her delay or absence, which immediately raised concerns. Katie, who was driving to work that morning on a desolate road surrounded by fields, noticed something strange. She spotted a car parked at an odd angle, which she recognized as Lori's. The car was in an area where Lori had no reason to be, as there were no nearby shops or houses. Katie, feeling uneasy, decided not to approach the car, but instead called Justin, Lori's son, to check on his mother. Justin, who hadn't received his usual morning call from Lori, already had a feeling that something was wrong. He rushed to her house, calling her phone on the way, but there was no response. When he arrived, he noticed that her car wasn't there, which tightened the knot in his stomach. Upon entering the house, he found her 2 dogs, Mac and Nikki, unattended and obviously hungry, something his mother would never allow. The bed was neatly made, and there was no sign that Lori had had breakfast that morning. It felt as though she had never returned home. Justin and Katie decided to return to the car Katie had seen. Upon closer inspection, Justin confirmed that it was his mother's 2003 Chrysler sedan. The sunroof was open, the steering indicator was broken, and Lori's purse was on the floor under the rear seats. Her iPhone was also on the floor, lighting up as it received calls. Justin felt a deep sense of unease and decided that this was a matter for the police, so they called 911. When the police arrived and examined Lori's car, they discovered bloodstains covering more than half of the back seat and a dirty shoe print on the passenger side. Lori's clothes, including her underwear, were scattered around, and it was clear that they had been forcibly removed. The hooks on her bras were bent, and some items had bloodstains. Everything pointed to a brutal crime. Lori Bray was now officially listed as missing. The news spread quickly, and the small community mobilized, organizing large-scale searches. Many of Lori's friends and neighbors took to social media, posting about her disappearance and urging anyone with information to come forward. One post read, "She would never leave her dogs. Someone must know something. Even the smallest piece of evidence will help. Please pray for her safe return." The community also organized their own search groups, combing the streets and surrounding areas for any sign of Lori. Her disappearance was a shocking event that drew immediate attention from the media and the public, as it was highly unusual for something like this to happen in such a close-knit and peaceful area. The spot where her car was found was overgrown with grass and dirt, further deepening the mystery of what had happened to Lori Bray.
The field seemed to stretch endlessly, making the search in such an expansive area an incredibly daunting task. News reports quickly covered the story, showing volunteers, friends, and police officers combing through the fields north of Laurel in an attempt to find any clues that might lead them to Lori Bray. It was noted that Lori was last seen leaving her job on a Tuesday evening. Deputy David J. mentioned in an interview that everything happened near the intersection of Buffalo Trail Road and the road leading to Laurel Airport, close to a cemetery. Family members and friends of the missing woman began searching at 10 a.m., with about 670 people joining the effort, according to Sheriff Mike Linder. Sheriff Linder explained that they were carefully examining the area where Lori's car was found, but they had not yet discovered any evidence to explain why she was there. Their primary goal was to locate Lori and ensure her safety. Linder also mentioned that a patrolling officer had noticed Lori's car the day before, but, unable to find the owner, had left it unattended. The police decided to involve technological tools in their investigation, immediately beginning to track Lori's phone calls and issuing several search warrants. Despite their efforts, they were unable to find significant evidence, so they decided to wait for new information before continuing the search after dark. As night fell, the already difficult search became almost impossible, prompting the police to ask volunteers to step back. Most reluctantly complied with the request. Katie, who was close to Lori, was asked to provide surveillance footage from the casino where Lori worked. Katie not only handed over the footage, but also identified most of the people in it and provided their contact information to the police for questioning. The footage revealed that on the night Lori was last seen, she had followed her usual routine. She closed the casino, restocked supplies, and chatted briefly with two women at the bar. Katie mentioned that these women were regular customers. Another person, a man named Diego Hernandez, who worked with one of the women, also appeared in the footage. Diego ordered a drink, and Lori asked to see his ID before serving him. A few minutes later, Lori was seen pointing to her watch, indicating that the casino was closing and that Diego needed to leave. After a brief conversation, Lori resumed her work of closing the casino. At 11:20 p.m., Lori grabbed her bag, locked the door, and exited the casino. Her car was parked just outside the door. She briefly returned to her car, seemingly to speak with someone before getting in. The footage showed another person in the car with her who turned out to be Diego. The police quickly identified him, noting that he was sitting in the passenger seat and that no one else was around. The detectives needed to establish why Diego had been with Lori and whether he had seen or heard anything suspicious that night, such as another customer who might have lingered or behaved oddly. Shortly before midnight on October 1st, the police found Diego at his home. He confirmed that he was the person seen in the surveillance footage and that Lori had kindly offered him a ride home after they chatted in the casino. Diego explained that he had gone to the casino for the free drinks and had arrived around 9 p.m. He spent a couple of hours there, playing on a few machines and talking with people. According to Diego, Lori dropped him off at his house, they said their goodbyes, and then he left to meet a friend and continue the night out. He claimed he hadn't seen Lori since she drove away. However, the officers were suspicious of Diego's condition. His face was covered with fresh scratches, which one officer pointed out, suggesting that it looked like someone had been fighting him off. Diego explained that the scratches were from a fight 2 days earlier with a friend named Nick, which had occurred after a visit to a local strip club. Diego added that Nick was wearing rings, which had caused the cuts when they hit his face during the altercation. Despite the officer's suspicion, Diego appeared calm and confident during the interrogation, giving no indication that he was lying. The police tracked down Nick, who confirmed that they had fought in his car. Nick said that Diego had suddenly started acting aggressively, which led to the altercation. At one point, Nick grabbed Diego's head before pushing him out of the car. However, Nick was shocked to see the state of Diego's face, as he insisted that the scratches weren't from their fight. Nick had no reason to lie to the officers, as he had already admitted to the altercation, and there were no visible scratches on him from that incident. Although Nick's story partially matched Diego's, the police had no other theories except for Diego's potential involvement in Lori's disappearance. Diego remained the last known person to be with Lori, and by his own admission, he had been in her car that night. The surveillance footage from the casino could verify whether Diego had the scratches on his face at the time he was with Lori.
Early in the morning of October 2nd, the search team pressed forward with renewed energy, continuing their efforts throughout the day. By 7:30 p.m., detectives received a disturbing call. A man riding his ATV in a wooded area had made a horrific discovery: the body of a woman, lying naked on the ground, severely beaten and clearly deceased. The police were confident they knew who it was, but they refrained from making any public statements. That evening, the media reported that a woman's body had been found, but the police did not immediately confirm the identity. Despite this, the search for Lori was called off as soon as the news spread widely. Many officers, along with forensic experts, were dispatched to the location where the body was found. Soon, it was confirmed that the body was indeed Lori Bray's. She was discovered less than 2 miles from where her car had been abandoned, lying at the bottom of a ditch, completely naked and curled up in a fetal position. Lori's body was covered in abrasions and bruises, with her own blood matted in her hair. There were severe bruising around both eyes, a swollen lip, and several broken ribs. It was later determined that Lori had died from strangulation, but the medical examiner also noted blunt force trauma to her face. It was confirmed that Lori had been sexually assaulted, but despite the severity of her injuries and the substantial blood loss, no semen or other forensic evidence was found on her body. This indicated that she had been killed elsewhere, possibly in her car, and then transported to the location where her body was discovered. Investigators found Lori's small cross necklace near her body, along with a clear shoe print that matched the one found in her car. The condition of Lori's body was described as shocking by officers, who were appalled by the level of violence and cruelty inflicted upon her. They noted that whoever committed this crime was a monster. Colleagues and friends of Lori were baffled as to who could have wanted to harm her. Lori was well liked by the regular patrons of the casino, had a good reputation in the community, and had never mentioned having any problems. The police initially explored a few potential leads, discovering that Lori had been involved in abusive and controlling relationships in the past. However, these former partners were quickly ruled out as suspects for various reasons. Meanwhile, fear gripped the local residents, who worried that a violent criminal might still be on the loose in the streets of Laurel. One resident even commented that Lori's death could have a serious impact on life in the city. Nevertheless, the community came together to support Lori's family and friends, raising money to care for her dogs, help her son Justin, and cover funeral expenses. The police were able to trace Lori's phone activity between midnight and 3 a.m. on the night she disappeared. One call was made from the area near the casino, another from the location where her body was found, and a third near Diego's house. The calls emanating from Diego's house and its surroundings were made shortly before Lori was found, indicating that she was likely already dead by then. This was significant evidence against Diego, but even more intriguing was that Diego had been seen at the bar a few hours before, pressuring random women to give him a ride home. One of the women working behind the bar mentioned that she had refused Diego's advances multiple times, finding his behavior awkward and annoying. On October 4th, detectives executed a search warrant at Diego's home. They collected the clothes he had been seen wearing on the night of Lori's disappearance. Some of these clothes appeared to have been bleached or freshly washed, which raised suspicion since his room was otherwise full of dirty laundry. The police also found a pair of soaking wet Nike sneakers, the tread of which matched the shoe print found in Lori's car and next to her body. Detectives began examining Diego's phone and discovered that just hours after Lori was killed, he had conducted several incriminating internet searches. These included searches like, how long do investigations last, how long does the FBI keep a case open, and when do investigations become cold? Diego was brought to the police station where he provided a DNA sample. During questioning, he changed his previous statement, claiming that he and Lori had spent some time together talking in the car, during which they had a good relationship. He said they smoked a few cigarettes and then had consensual sex near his house, but he swore that he had not seen her after that. Despite his attempts to revise his story, the mounting evidence against him painted a damning picture. The police initially lacked sufficient evidence to detain Diego Hernandez, so they allowed him to return home. However, as the investigation continued and test results were processed, the situation changed dramatically. Diego's DNA was found to match the DNA on Lori Bray's body and under her nails, providing the police with the crucial evidence they needed. Diego was called back in for questioning, during which he altered his story once again. This time, he claimed that he and Lori had been in a secret relationship for over a year, which he had kept hidden at Lori's request. He explained that this was why he had initially lied to the police. However, the police had already reviewed Lori's phone records and there was no evidence of any such relationship in the year leading up to her death. In fact, surveillance footage from the casino showed Lori asking for Diego's ID and speaking with him only briefly to tell him that they were closing for the night. Their phones had never been in the same locations, nor had they called each other, further discrediting Diego's claims. On October 8th, 22-year-old Diego Hernandez was arrested at his home in Laurel around 8 p.m. and taken to the Yellowstone County Detention Facility. He was charged with the murder of Lori Bray. 2 days later, formal charges of premeditated murder were filed against him. This news shocked the community, as Diego was well known and liked by many. He had always seemed polite, friendly, and rather quiet. His friends described him as down-to-earth and sincere, making the charges against him all the more surprising. The police theorized that, based on the CCTV footage showing Lori voluntarily getting into Diego's car, she had likely offered to give him a ride home out of pity since it was already late. Once they arrived at Diego's house, he likely attempted to rape Lori. However, she fought back, leading to Diego brutally beating and strangling her. Diego's claim of consensual sex was likely an attempt to explain the DNA evidence he knew the police would find, prompting him to change his story once he realized the inevitable outcome of the investigation. The prosecutor highlighted the unimaginable level of violence and cruelty inflicted upon Lori, describing her death as both brutal and horrific. As the investigation progressed, there were discussions about whether additional charges could be brought against Diego. However, he never admitted to the crime and continued to deny that he had harmed Lori in any way. In the days following Diego's arrest, the community rallied together to honor Lori's memory. A memorial service was held in the park where she used to walk her dogs, and charity fundraising continued, with all proceeds going to the organizations Lori had passionately supported. At one of the events, many people wore purple t-shirts emblazoned with the words, "We will always love you." Christy Salbinson, Lori's neighbor for 3 years, remarked that she had no idea how many people cared about Lori until she saw the outpouring of love and support from the community. She expressed that the tragedy had brought the town closer together, and everyone had gathered to light a candle in Lori's memory. Diego Hernandez pleaded not guilty, and by the time of his trial in March 2021, he was 24 years old. Despite his continued insistence on his innocence and claims of a secret relationship with Lori, his statements infuriated her family and friends, who denounced them as blatant lies. During opening statements, Diego's defense attorney suggested that the abandoned car might have been tampered with or contaminated before law enforcement searched it, casting doubt on the reliability of the evidence found there. The defense also pointed out that methadone was found in Lori's system for which she had no prescription. They speculated that if Lori had hidden her use of methadone, she could have also hidden a relationship with Diego. However, the prosecution dismissed this theory as absurd, arguing that it had no basis in reality. They called DNA and forensic experts to testify, presenting numerous pieces of evidence that linked Diego to the crime. The prosecution was able to show photographs of scratches on Diego's face and the condition of Lori's body when it was discovered, images too graphic to be shown on television. The DNA evidence was particularly damning, with experts testifying that Diego's DNA was found under Lori's fingernails. Hernandez's defense team tried to challenge the DNA evidence, questioning the peer review process at the crime lab and pointing out that there were no properly conducted repeat tests. However, the prosecution's case remained strong. Detective Shabana from the sheriff's office used data from Verizon Wireless to determine Lori's phone's location on the night of October 1st. This data showed that her phone was already at the crime scene when Diego was supposedly still with her. Michael Fegley, a mobile phone geolocation expert, created a video presentation using Google Earth to show where Lori's phone had been on the morning of October 1st, further solidifying the timeline. The data collected from Diego's phone, however, did not contain any useful information, leading detectives to suspect that Diego had turned off his phone before contacting Lori. The call log showed no communication between Lori and Diego in the year before her murder, further disproving Diego's claims of a secret relationship. The jury was also shown photos of the scratches on Diego's face, alongside images of Lori's condition when she was found. These visuals, too shocking for public viewing, convinced the jury that Lori had no chance to defend herself. Investigators confirmed that the DNA found in Lori's car and on her clothing, as well as under her nails, matched Diego's with a probability of 1 in 60 sextillion. They also established that the pants found at Diego's house had been re-washed just hours after Lori's death. After both sides presented their cases, the jury deliberated for only 2 hours before reaching a unanimous verdict. Diego was guilty of premeditated murder. Before sentencing, Diego requested to make a statement. In a surprising turn of events, after over a year of denying any involvement, he confessed in court saying, "I did it, I killed Lori." The courtroom was stunned, and the judge, who had never seen anything like this in his 40-year career, sentenced Diego Hernandez to life in prison with a minimum of 35 years before he could be eligible for parole. This incident deeply affected many people, both those who knew Lori and those who had never met her. The town experienced a collective sense of loss, and one resident remarked that it had fundamentally changed the sense of closeness and safety they had once felt. Another resident described Lori as a gentle, loving soul who always saw the good in others, no matter what they had done.